Welcome to adult confirmation instruction. Over the next 12 hours, we are going to cover the basics of the Christian faith from a Lutheran perspective. We'll talk about baptism and the Lord's Supper, the Ten Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, the Apostles' Creed, and confession and absolution, which is called the Office of the Keys. But we're not going to approach it in the same way that we teach 7th and 8th graders. For 7th and 8th graders, junior confirmation, we usually start with the 10 commandments and go through each commandment one by one, and have them memorize Luther's explanation and talk about each one. That takes up to 60 hours to do it that way. Instead, the approach for adult confirmation starts with the assumption that you already know certain things, either about the Christian faith or at least about life in general, which 7th and 8th graders don't know. We may say that we are sinners, but even a non-Christian knows that life here on earth is not the way it was supposed to be. Things don't work the way they're supposed to work. People get diseases, there's floods and famines and earthquakes. There's all kinds of evil in the world. So I don't need necessarily to teach the 10 commandments to show these are the things that are evil, because I think most adults understand already that evil exists. Evil is when things don't work the way God intended for them to work, when our bodies get sick and die instead of healing themselves and living on, and so on and so forth. So we're going to approach this from a more adult or formal process, starting where you would talk with somebody who's maybe never heard about the Christian faith before. Who is God? Is there a God? What does God think of us? What is God's answer for our problems? Where do the world's different religions come from? How do we know that this particular system of beliefs is the correct one? Everybody claims to have the truth. How do you know where to find the truth? These are some of the topics that we'll be addressing. And along the way, we'll reference the 10 Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, and the Creed. This is Luther's Small Catechism. It doesn't look so small, actually. It's almost 300 pages. But this is really two different books in one. Luther's Small Catechism actually starts on page 11 in this book, and it goes on until page 40, is it 44? Let's see, yeah, page 44. This is Luther's Small Catechism. This is the explanation to Luther's Small Catechism. When Luther was a parish priest, he lived he was working 50, 60 years after Gutenberg invented the movable type printing press. And he took advantage of a fellow German who invented the printing press, took advantage of that to teach people. During the Dark Ages, many people couldn't read. Most people couldn't read. And so the teaching that Luther prepared was for priests who were supposed to be able to read, to teach the head of the household. And then the head of the household would take this little book and the teachings into their home and teach their family members, their children, their servants, whoever was living in the household. And what would they learn? They would learn the 10 Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, the Creed. They would learn about baptism, what is the Lord's Supper, Holy Communion, and then this thing called confession and absolution, or referred to as the Office of the Keys. And for each of the commandments, for each part of the Creed, and so forth, Luther gave an explanation which was in common person's language, common German for him and where he was working. And in fact, in German, the words roll off your tongue in a memorable way. So you say, what is the first commandment? You shall have no other gods. That's in the Bible. Then what does this mean? Luther gave an answer. We should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. That's what we have youngsters, junior high kids, memorized. Because at that point in life, they don't know about lots of different religions. They don't know, haven't thought about the big questions of life that lead people to search for God. So we teach them this. And then they can refer to that back later in life. Or their pastors can in sermons and lessons and so forth. So everybody is going to get one of these, Luther's Small Catechism. You may remember it from this version, which is a bright blue. That was the 1991 version. And prior to that was the 1986 version, which was only used for a very short amount of time when the blue hymnal was published. And before that was the 1941 version, which most adults may have remembered if you were confirmed as a kid and now you're in your 50s or 60s or whatever. Of course, my father has that one, but because he was born in 1934. But his father had it in German on one side, English on the other, and his father, my great-grandfather, had it all in German. So down through the ages, we're still teaching children, to learn these things by memory. We're going to approach it from the procession, or the lessons outlined in this book, God for Us. And the title will become apparent as we go through the material. So everybody gets a workbook, everybody gets a catechism, and in the church we are in the Bible business. So we buy them in bulk and can distribute them. If you don't have a English Standard Version, which is the version being used in our Sunday school materials and in confirmation classes, it's the version used in the catechism, then you'll get one of these as well. I should mention also, the back portion then of Luther's catechism isn't written by Luther. Luther's Small Catechism is repeated, but then down over the last nearly 500 years, people have added to it, this thick stuff here. So like under the 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and defend him in every physical need, or something like that. What's been added to that over the years is some Bible verses that go along with thou shalt not kill. Actually, that's the way I memorized it. In this one, it's thou shalt not murder, or you shall not murder. But then they've also added Bible verses, proof texts, Bible stories, maybe like David and Bathsheba, where he arranged to have Uriah, Bathsheba's wife, go into battle where he was sure to die, and that was murder. And then in later years, it picked up topics such as abortion and euthanasia or mercy killing, and even suicide, so that the rest of this book becomes a reference for you to look things up. So is some particular thing killing? You know that the 5th commandment, you shall not murder. You can look it up in here in the backside and find Bible verses, Bible narratives, topical discussions, and so forth. So that's the reference work. The first pages, we make kids memorize. The back, we teach them to use. We're not actually going to be spending much time with this, but you'll use it as a reference. We're also not going to be spending much time paging through the scriptures. But you need to have a copy because there's stuff in the workbook you may want to refer to or look up later. Plus, as I said, we're in the Bible business. And then finally, the workbook. I've been using this workbook since about 1998, I think was the first year I used it. At that time, it was already 10 years old. It was first published in 1988. It comes out of our sister Lutheran church in Australia. So once in a while, you will see some strangely spelled words. They're spelled with the English, British English spelling, like Savior, S-A-V-I-O-U-R, or Center, C-E-N-T-R-E, which is different. So if you see those strange spellings, that's why. But I find this book, people find it to be interesting, engaging. It asks lots of questions. It also provides lots of answers. As we go through the workbook, one reason for having a workbook is it's going to keep me focused. I could talk for hours and hours about all kinds of stuff and never get through the material. So the workbook keeps me to about an hour a lesson. I try to get through the material in an hour. I'm not going to go around and ask people to read. I'm not going to interrupt and have quizzes and questions. But if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. You don't have to raise your hand or anything because I'll just keep on talking. But go ahead and interrupt. What about this? What about that? Or does this mean? Or does that mean? If you don't ask your question, I'll probably move on beyond it and you may forget it. But if you've got the question, I'm pretty sure there's going to be other people in the class who have the very same question. So don't hesitate to interrupt. Now, this tape recording may be used For those who've missed class or can't attend a particular class, it could be used in a congregation during a time of vacancy when the pastor's away and yet they need to have adult confirmation class. So I don't know the setting that it'll be used, but if you're picking this up and you're going to be coming to physically present in classes in the future, don't hesitate to bring food or drink with you. If you're coming from work or you're going someplace, don't hesitate. I know time is tight and you got to sometimes do two things at once. So feel free to go ahead and do that. Again, let's see, interrupt with any questions. What else? We'll try to take a break if we're going to do 2 lessons in one night. So you'll get 5-10 minutes between 1-hour sessions. It may go a little less than 2 hours or less than an hour. It may go a little more than an hour. I'll do my best to balance that out. I can't ask if there's any questions because if you ask the TV or the computer you're watching, I won't hear you. So with that, let's go ahead and go to chapter 1 in the book, God for Us. That begins on page 5.